The Prometheus dawn cut through the darkness of space like a needle through fabric, its engines humming with the steady rhythm that had carried it through 3 years of deep space surveying without incident. Captain Elena Vasquez sat in her command chair, reviewing the day's reports with the kind of calm focus that had earned her this posting in the first place. The crew of 847 souls moved through their duties with practiced efficiency, each one handpicked from Earth's finest institutions and military academies. They were humanity's ambassadors to the unknown, pushing farther into uncharted space than any human vessel had dared venture before. The mission was simple on paper: survey the void's edge, catalog any anomalies, and return with data that might explain why entire star systems have been going dark in this region. The Galactic Council, that massive bureaucratic entity representing 47 different species across known space, had declared the area off limits after losing contact with 3 separate expeditions. But humanity was new to the galactic community, barely 300 years into their spacefaring age, and they had something the older species seemed to have lost: curiosity that overrode fear. Commander James Rodriguez stood at the sensor station, his dark eyes scanning the readouts with increasing concern. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange," he said, his voice cutting through the quiet murmur of bridge conversation. "The stars ahead, they're not just dark. They're gone." Vasquez stood and walked to his station, her boots making soft sounds against the deck plating. The holographic display showed what should have been a dense star field, but instead there was nothing, not darkness in the sense of space between stars, but an absolute void that seemed to drink in their sensor beams without reflection or echo. "How far does it extend?" she asked. Rodriguez worked his controls, sending out broader scanning pulses. "At least 30 light years in every direction from our current position. And it's growing." He looked up at her, and she saw something she'd never seen in his eyes before: genuine fear. "Captain, whatever this is, it's expanding at approximately 0.3 light years per standard year." The implications hit the bridge crew like a physical wave. At that rate, the void would reach council space within 2 centuries, a blink of an eye on galactic timescale. As Vasquez made her decision with the kind of quick thinking that separated good captains from dead ones. "All stop," she ordered. "Prepare a data package with everything we've observed, and set it on automatic transmission back to Earth Command." The bridge crew moved with urgent precision. Sarah Chun, the chief science officer, appeared on the view screen from her lab 3 decks below. "Captain, you need to see this," she said, her normally calm academic tone edged with excitement. "I've been analyzing the energy signatures from the void's boundary, and they don't match anything in our databases or the Council shared scientific archives. Can you give me the simple version, Doctor?" Vasquez asked. Chun nodded. "Whatever is causing this, it's not operating on physics as we understand them. The boundary isn't consuming matter. It's erasing the fundamental forces that allow matter to exist in the first place." Chill ran down Vasquez's finished, commanded vessels through ion storms, navigated unstable wormholes, and even survived a brief skirmish with pirates in the outer colonies. But this was different. This was something that made humanity's greatest achievements feel like children playing with toys. "Recommendations?" she asked her senior staff. Rodriguez spoke first. "We should retreat immediately and let the Council know what we found." Chun disagreed. "This might be our only chance to gather data this close to the phenomenon. The Council species have been studying this from a distance for decades without progress." The debate continued for several minutes. With valid points on all sides, Vasquez listened to each voice, weighing options against outcomes. Finally, she raised her hand for silence. "We'll compromise," she announced. "We'll deploy a full spread of long-range probes to gather data. then begin a slow retreat while monitoring the results, if anything changes. We jumped to faster than light immediately. The crew moved to execute her orders. 16 advanced probes launched from the Prometheus Dawn's deployment base, each one packed with sensors worth more than a small planetary economy. They streaked toward the void's edge, transmitting data back to the ship in real-time bursts for 2 hours. Everything proceeded according to plan. The probes gathered unprecedented information about the boundary layer, revealing patterns and structures that defied conventional physics. Jen and her team worked frantically to process the incoming data, their excited chatter filling the science channels. Then, Probe 7 crossed an invisible threshold. The transmission didn't cut out. It transformed instead of sensor data. The probe began sending back something else. Patterns, sequences, information encoded in ways that made the ship's computers struggle to process it. What is that? Vasquez demanded. Chun's face had gone pale. Captain, I think it's communicating. Something on the other side of that boundary is trying to talk to us. Before Vasquez could respond, the void moved. It didn't expand gradually as it had been doing for years. It leaped forward like a living thing, covering the distance to the Prometheus Dawn in seconds. Alarm shrieked across the bridge. Emergency jump. Vasquez shouted, "Get us out of here now." The faster-than-light drive engaged, reality bending around the ship as it prepared to tear a hole through space-time and escape. But something else was faster. The void touched the Prometheus Dawn's hull, and everything changed. The ship didn't explode or dissolve. It shifted. Vasquez felt herself being pulled in directions that didn't exist in normal three-dimensional space. The bridge around her seemed to fold inside out while simultaneously remaining exactly where it was. She heard her crew crying out in confusion and fear, their voices distorting as if coming from very far away. The last thing she saw before consciousness fled was the view screen showing something impossible. The Prometheus Dawn was in two places at once, existing in normal space and somewhere else entirely. The two realities bleeding together like watercolors in rain. When she opened her eyes again, the bridge was quiet. Her crew sat at their stations, looking around in confusion. The alarms had stopped. The view screen showed stars, but they were wrong, configured in patterns that didn't match any known region of space. "Status report," Vasquez said, her voice hoarse. Rodriguez checked his instruments, then checked them again, his face a mask of disbelief. "Captain, I don't know where we are," he admitted. "These constellations don't match anything in our navigation database. More than that, the background radiation is all wrong. The quantum foam shows different properties. Even the fundamental constants seem shifted by tiny fractions." Chun's voice came over the intercom, shaking but determined. "Captain, I think we've been pulled into a pocket dimension, somewhere adjacent to our reality, but operating on slightly different rules." Vasquez stood and walked to the view screen, pressing her hand against it as if she could touch the strange stars beyond. "Can we get back?" she asked. The question hung in the air for a long moment before Chun answered. "I don't know," she said quietly, "but I think whatever brought us here wanted us alive." This wasn't an attack, it was an invitation. In the weeks that followed, the crew of the Prometheus Dawn would discover just how right Chun was. They had been chosen, pulled from reality by beings of pure energy who existed in the spaces between dimensions. These entities had been refugees themselves, fleeing the very phenomenon that was devouring the galaxy the humans called home, and they had seen something in humanity, some spark of potential, some capacity for adaptation and evolution that made them believe these strange primates might be the key to survival. Time moved differently in the pocket dimension. What would be 11 years in the universe outside would become centuries inside. Generations of subjective experience compressed into a relative moment. The Prometheus Dawn and its crew would have time to learn, to grow, to evolve into something that could face what devours galaxies. But first, they would have to survive the transformation, and not all of them would remain entirely human by the end. The Carthus Junction was one of the busiest trade hubs in Council space. A massive station orbiting a blue giant star where ships from dozens of species came to exchange goods, information, and gossip on what the locals called a typical rotation. Approximately 15,000 vessels occupied the space around the station, their transponders creating a light show of identification signals that painted the darkness. With artificial constellations, Traffic Control Officer Krell9, a Vrel with 6 eyes and the patience of a saint, had managed this chaos for 40 standard years without a single major incident. That record was about to end. The energy signature appeared without warning on every sensor in the system simultaneously. Massive spike that shouldn't have been possible. Outside of Supernova Krell9's middle eyes widened in alarm as his screens lit up with warning ships began emergency maneuvers, scattering like startled fish as something tore through the fabric of space-time itself. The Prometheus Dawn dropped out of faster-than-light travel in the center of the junction, and Krell9 felt his breathing spiracles constrict with instinctive fear. The ship was wrong. It had left 11 years ago as a standard human deep space surveyor, functional, practical, with the clean lines typical of human engineering. What returned was something else entirely. The hull rippled with patterns that hurt to look at directly. Geometric shapes that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. The metal, if it was still metal, appeared to be breathing, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that suggested life. Energy fields danced across the surface in colors that didn't have names, and the ship's drive signature read like nothing in any known database. Krell9 reached for the emergency broadcast controls with trembling manipulator appendages before he could activate them. His communications array crackled to life. Carthus Junction Traffic Control. This is the Prometheus Dawn requesting docking clearance. The voice was calm, professional, unmistakably human. We've been gone a while. We have a lot to share. Captain Elena Vasquez sounded exactly as she had 11 years ago when she'd filed her departure flight plan. Confident, measured, competent. But Krell9 had been doing this job long enough to hear what wasn't being said. There was something underneath that calm voice. Some depth of experience that turned simple words into something almost alien. Prometheus Dawn. This is Carthus Control, he managed, his translation device struggling to keep his voice steady. You are ordered to maintain your current position. Do not approach the station. Do not activate any weapon systems. Council security forces are being notified. There was a pause, and Krell9 could imagine the human captain conferring with her crew when Vasquez responded. There was something that might have been amusement in her tone. We understand. Control, we're transmitting our crew manifest and full sensor logs now. We mean no harm to anyone here. Within minutes, the junction was in controlled chaos. Council security ships surrounded the Prometheus Dawn. At a distance deemed safe by computers that were making their best guesses, the station went into full lockdown, with all civilian traffic halted until the situation could be assessed. And somewhere in the depths of Council space, the news was already traveling at faster-than-light speeds. The lost human ship had returned. The Council's emergency session convened within 6 hours, a record time that spoke to how seriously they took the situation. 47 species sent their representatives, filling the grand chamber with a cacophony of different atmospheres, gravities, and communication methods. Archons, ancient beings of crystallized thought who claimed to be the Council's founding members, called the session to order with a pulse of psychic energy that demanded silence. High Counselor Vesh Karen, an Archon who had served for 3,000 years, projected his thoughts into the minds of all assembled. The human vessel has returned, he stated unnecessarily, This presents several concerning questions. Grand Admiral Thoraxis of the Crystalline Collective, whose species had been exploring space for 10 million years, spoke next through a chorus of chiming harmonics. My ships report that the human vessel's technology is unlike anything in our databases. The energy signatures suggest capabilities that should not be possible within our current understanding of physics. I recommend immediate quarantine and study. The human ambassador, Marcus Chun, stood from his delegation section. He was young by council standards, barely 70 years old, and most of the elder species still treated humanity as children playing at galactic politics with respect. Admiral, these are our people, he said firmly. We demand they be allowed to return home. Veshkaran's psychic presence pressed down on the chamber like gravity. Ambassador Chun, your species sent that ship into a prohibited zone against council advice. They vanished for 11 standard years. Now they return with technology that frightens species who have crossed the stars for longer than your world has had multicellular life. You will forgive us if we exercise caution. The debate raged for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The council voted to enforce strict quarantine protocols until the Prometheus dawn could be properly assessed. 3 days later, boarding teams approached the human ship with every precaution their combined technologies could provide. The docking bay that opened to receive them was clean, well lit, and utterly normal in appearance, which somehow made it more unsettling. Captain Vasquez met them at the airlock with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She looked exactly as she had 11 years ago. Not a day older, which was impossible given the time that had passed. Welcome aboard, she said, gesturing for them to follow her into the ship's interior. The boarding team, composed of security specialists from 6 different species, moved cautiously through corridors that seemed too normal. They passed crew members who stopped to nod politely before continuing about their duties. Everything seemed routine, mundane, safe, except it wasn't. Commander Ralph of the Vrel hegemony had been a security specialist for 200 years, and his instincts were screaming that something was profoundly wrong. It took him several minutes to identify what was bothering him. The crew moved with too much precision when 2 humans passed each other in a corridor. They adjusted their paths with millimeter accuracy without appearing to acknowledge each other's presence when a team was working on a maintenance panel. Their movements were so synchronized they might have been a single organism with multiple bodies. Captain Vasquez, he said carefully, your crew seems very well coordinated. Vasquez nodded as if he'd made a perfectly ordinary observation. We've had a lot of time to practice working together. Commander, would you like to see our briefing room? We have quite a lot to show you. The briefing room was ordinary except for the holographic display that dominated its center. Vasquez activated it with a gesture, and the assembled security team found themselves looking at something that made several of them recoil instinctively. This is where we've been, Vasquez said simply. The display showed a space that wasn't space, a pocket dimension where the normal laws of physics bent like warm glass. Energy beings moved through it like fish through water, their forms suggesting intelligence beyond normal comprehension. And there, in the center, was the Prometheus dawn, surrounded by structures that grew rather than were built. We were pulled into this place by beings who call themselves the Luminari, Vasquez explained, her tone that of a professor giving a lecture. They're refugees from something they call the Devours, the same phenomenon that's been making galaxies go dark across the universe. She paused, meeting each team member's eyes in turn. Time moves differently there. For you, we've been gone 11 years. For us, it's been 4 centuries. The implications hit the room like a bomb. 400 years of subjective experience compressed into 11 objective years. That meant everyone on this ship had lived entire lifetimes in that pocket dimension, had children who grew old and died, had grandchildren, Had watched generations pass, Rolf felt his breathing passages constrict. That's impossible. He managed. You look the same. Vasquez smiled. And this time, it was genuinely amused. We learned some new tricks. Commander, the Luminari taught us things about biology, physics, and consciousness that your species haven't discovered yet. They showed us how to evolve. She gestured, and the hologram shifted to show the Prometheus dawn. Transforming over time, the team watched as the ship changed from its original configuration into something that blurred the line between machine and organism. We didn't just survive in that place. Vasquez continued. We adapted, we grew, we became something new, and the Luminari showed us what's coming. The hologram changed again, showing the Devourers in all their terrible Gloricanton-sized entities that consume not just matter and energy, but the fundamental laws that allowed reality to exist. Security team watched in horror as the simulation showed entire galaxies being unmade. Their stars winking out like candles in a storm. They're coming here, Vasquez said quietly. They've been coming for millions of years. And now they're close. The Council knows this. You've been watching the darkness spread, losing contact with entire sectors. But you don't know how to stop them. Grand Admiral Thoraxis is representative. A crystalline named Chord of Seven Tones chimed a question. And you do? Vasquez nodded. The council chamber had never been so divided in its entire 3-million-year history. High Councilor Veshkaran watched as representatives from 47 species argued, threatened, and postured while the humans sat quietly in their delegation section, waiting with a patience that somehow made them more unsettling than if they'd been shouting alongside everyone else. This is madness, roared Ambassador Grouth of the Korthian Empire, his three mouths speaking in harmony. We are being asked to trust a species that has been members of this council for less than 3 centuries. They disappear into forbidden space and return with impossible technology, with claims of communicating with beings of pure energy, with warnings of doom. I say we seize their ship and extract their secrets by force if necessary. The Crystalline Collective's chorus rose in harmonic agreement, while the Archons pulsed thoughtful consideration into the psychic space of the chamber. Ambassador Marcus Chun stood slowly, his elderly human frame supported by subtle cybernetics that most species didn't realize he wore. You can try, he said simply. Captain Vasquez has made it clear that the Prometheus Dawn will defend itself if threatened. But more importantly, you'd be making a terrible mistake. Grand Admiral Thoraxis manifested a crystalline avatar that loomed over the chamber floor. Are you threatening us, human? Chun shook his head. I'm trying to save you from yourselves. You don't understand what you'd be dealing with. The technology my people brought back isn't like upgrading from fusion drives to quantum engines. It's fundamentally different, operating on principles that require a complete rewiring of how you think about reality. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Captain Vasquez told your security teams the truth. The human crew spent 4 centuries in that pocket dimension, 400 years of constant evolution, adaptation, and learning from beings who exist partially outside our normal dimensions. They didn't just gain knowledge, they changed who they are on a fundamental level. The chamber erupted in skeptical noise. Avish Karen projected a wave of psychic silence that settled over the assembly like a blanket. Explain. He commanded. Chun activated a holographic display that showed brain scans from the returned crew. These are neurological maps from Captain Vasquez and her senior staff. Notice anything unusual? A Vrel scientist in the medical delegation chittered in alarm. Those neural structures are impossible. The density of connections, the presence of what appears to be quantum entanglement between neurons, the way their brain activity synchronizes across. Individuals. This suggests a form of distributed consciousness. Chun nodded grimly. Every human who spent time in that pocket dimension came back changed. They think faster, process information across multiple dimensions, and can share concepts directly between minds. They're still human in every way that matters. They still feel emotions, still have individual personalities, still value their families and cultures. But they're also something more now. He let that sink in before continuing. Now imagine what happens if you try to force them to integrate that technology into your own biology or machinery. You didn't spend centuries adapting to it. You didn't have the Luminari guiding you through the transformation. It would be like trying to run quantum computing software on an abacus, not just ineffective, but actively destructive. The council chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. If the humans were telling the truth, then their technology was useless to the rest of the galaxy, and if they were lying, forcing them to share would prove it soon enough. What do you propose instead? Veshkaran asked. Finally, Captain Vasquez herself stepped forward from the human delegation, and every eye in the chamber turned to her. She looked small compared to many of the species present, but there was something in the way she carried herself that suggested depths of capability that made physical size irrelevant. "We help you prepare," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. "We can't give you our technology, but we can share the principles behind it. We can help you build defenses using your own capabilities, upgraded with what we've learned. We can teach you how to think about the Devours in ways that might let you survive their arrival." She gestured, and a new hologram appeared. Schematics for shield generators that use familiar council technology reconfigured in novel ways. Start with this. Adaptive shielding that operates partially outside normal space-time. It won't stop the Devours, but it will buy you time to evacuate when they arrive. We can have these installed on your stations and major vessels within 6 months. Grand Admiral Thoraxis studied the schematics with the full attention of his massive crystalline intellect. This could work, he admitted grudgingly. The principles are sound, even if the theoretical framework is revolutionary. But shields are defensive measures. What about actually stopping these Devours? Vasquez's expression grew serious. That's where it gets complicated. The Devours aren't evil or malicious. They're hungry. They consume the fundamental forces of reality because that's what they need to survive. They've been doing it for longer than our universe has existed in its current form. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of 4 centuries of study. You can't stop them with weapons. Every species that's tried has been consumed, but you might be able to redirect them, or even negotiate with them, if you're willing to become something they recognize as more than just food. The chamber erupted in chaos again. The idea that the solution to an existential threat was transformation rather than destruction went against everything most council species believed. They had survived for millions of years by being stronger, smarter, more technologically advanced than their enemies. The concept of evolution as defense was alien to them, but the humans had evidence. Over the next weeks, human engineering teams spread across council space with remarkable speed. They worked alongside council scientists and engineers, not replacing them but augmenting their capabilities. Stations that would have taken decades to retrofit with new shielding systems were completed in weeks. Human advisors taught council species new ways of thinking about physics, new approaches to problems that had seemed unsolvable, and slowly, grudgingly, the elder species began to realize something uncomfortable. Humanity's youth was an advantage, not a weakness. The humans hadn't spent millions of years perfecting technologies and techniques that worked. They were used to adapting, to changing, to throwing out old ideas when new ones proved better. It made them flexible in ways the ancient species had forgotten how to. Better Sarah Chun, who had aged into a woman of 400 years despite looking 30, stood in a laboratory on the Arkan homeworld explaining principles of dimensional physics to scientists who had been studying the universe since before Earth's sun ignited. The key is not thinking of dimensions as separate things, she explained, manipulating a holographic model that showed reality as a fluid, interconnected whole. They're all part of the same structure, folded together like layers of dough and bread. The Devours move through these folds naturally, which is why they seem to appear and disappear unpredictably. An Archon scientist named Thought of Eternal Stars pulsed skepticism into the room. Our species has studied dimensional theory for 3 million years. You are suggesting we've been approaching it incorrectly all this time? Chun smiled with the patience of someone who had lived multiple lifetimes. Not incorrectly, incompletely. You've been studying dimensions from within the standard 4 we experience. The Luminari taught us how to perceive beyond that framework. It's like the difference between looking at a sculpture's photograph versus walking around the actual object. She activated a different display, showing how Council sensor technology could be modified to detect dimensional fluctuations that preceded Devour activity. If you implement these changes, you'll get approximately 6 hours warning before a Devourer enters your space. That's enough time to evacuate non-essential personnel and prepare your defenses. Thought of Eternal Stars studied the modifications, his ancient consciousness working through the implications. This is brilliant, he admitted finally. Simple, elegant, and completely different from anything we've attempted. How did your species discover principles that eluded us for millions of years? Chun's expression grew distant. We didn't discover them, we lived them. When you spend centuries existing partially outside normal space-time, you stop seeing dimensions as abstract mathematical concepts. They become as real and tangible as the floor beneath your feet. You learn to navigate them the way you learn to walk, through practice, falls, and getting back up again, back on Earth. Human colonies across the solar system buzzed with activity. The homeworld's population had grown to 15 billion in humanity's 3 centuries of spacefaring existence. And every major settlement was being retrofitted with the new defensive technologies. But there was resistance even among humans. Not everyone was comfortable with what the Prometheus Dawn crew had become. Protests erupted in major cities, demanding terrors with eyes that held. The outer reaches had been home to 17 billion souls across 300 settled systems before the evacuations began now. 6 months after the Council finally accepted humanity's warnings, only military personnel remained, volunteers from dozens of species who had chosen to make their stand here, buying time for the civilians fleeing deeper into Council Space Admiral Marcus Thorne, promoted from captain after the Prometheus Dawn's return, stood on the bridge of humanity's newest warship, the Ascendant Dawn, sister ship to Vasquez's transformed vessel around him. His crew worked with the synchronized precision that marked all humans who had undergone the evolution process. The fleet assembled at the outer reaches was the largest military force the Council had ever gathered. 5,000 warships from 47 species, each one upgraded with every defensive technology humanity could share in the limited time available. It should have been impressive. It should have felt like strength. Instead, Thorne looked at the assembled might of galactic civilization and felt a hollow certainty that it wouldn't be enough. Admiral, we're detecting spatial distortions at the periphery, Commander Lisa Park reported from the sensor station. It matches the pattern Captain Vasquez described. Thorne nodded, his enhanced perception already processing information from multiple dimensions simultaneously. Send the alert to all ships. This is what we've been waiting for. The darkness came first, not the ordinary darkness of space, but an absence so complete that it seemed to devour light itself. Stars at the edge of the sector simply ceased to exist, not exploding or fading, but vanishing as if they had never been. The boundary approached at speeds that violated every law of physics. The council species had spent millions of years confirming within minutes. An entire star system was gone, then another, then 10 more. The council fleet opened communications channels across every frequency. Commanders from dozens of species coordinating their response with practiced efficiency. Grand Admiral Thoraxis's consciousness manifested across the command network, his crystalline thoughts sharp with determination. All ships, assume defensive formation Delta 7. Prepare to engage on my mark. The fleet moved as one. Thousands of vessels arranging themselves in patterns designed by the galaxy's greatest military minds. Energy shields flickered to life. Weapons systems charged, and crews across hundreds of species prepared to face an enemy unlike anything they had encountered before. The Devours emerged from the boundary of nothingness like whales rising from an ocean's depths. Continent-sized entities of folded space and impossible geometry. They moved through reality as if it were water. Their forms suggested something alive, but operated on principles that made biology seem quaint where they passed. The fundamental forces of the universe simply stopped working. Gravity ceased. Electromagnetic fields dissolved. Even the strong and weak nuclear forces that held atoms together came undone. Matter didn't explode or decay. It simply forgot how to exist. All ships, open fire. Thoraxis commanded the council fleet. Unleashed devastation. Fusion lances capable of cracking planets blazed across the void. Quantum disruptors that could unmake entire moons fired in synchronized volleys. Reality anchors devices that reinforced the laws of physics in localized areas activated in overlapping fields designed to trap the Devourers in normal space-time. For a brief, hopeful moment, it seemed to work. The Devourers slowed, their impossible forms rippling as the reality anchors forced them to obey conventional physics. Weapons fire impacted their surfaces, causing visible disruptions in their structure. Crews across the fleet cheered. Then the Devourers adapted. The first reality anchor simply shut down, its systems overwhelmed by energies they weren't designed to handle. Then the second, then all of them, cascading across the fleet in a wave of failure that left the ships defenseless. The Devourers moved forward again, and this time nothing slowed them. The first ship to die was a Corthian battlecruiser that had served with distinction for 200 years. It got too close, trying to target what sensors suggested might be a vulnerable point. The Devourer didn't attack. It didn't fire weapons or deploy countermeasures. Simply passed through the same space the cruiser occupied. Ship came apart on a molecular level, its atoms forgetting how to bond with each other. Crew, hull, engines, and weapons all dissolved into clouds of disconnected particles that drifted apart and disappeared. No explosion, no debris, just cessation. The fleet's formation broke as ships scattered, trying to maintain distance from entities that could apparently occupy the same space as them. Panic spread across the command channels as species that had known victory for millions of years confronted something they couldn't fight in the first hour. The Council fleet lost 300 vessels in the second hour. They lost 500 more. Thorn watched the slaughter unfold with the terrible clarity of his enhanced consciousness, processing tactical data across multiple dimensions while simultaneously preparing for what came next. All human vessels, activate the resonance protocol, he commanded quietly across the battlefield. 23 human ships broke formation and moved forward, not attacking, not fleeing, but approaching the Devourers with purpose. The Ascendant Dawn led them, its transformed hull beginning to emit patterns of energy that matched frequencies the Luminari had taught Vasquez's crew centuries ago. The patterns weren't random. They were language, mathematics, and music, all combined into a form of communication that operated beyond normal physical constraints. The Devours paused. For the first time since entering Council space, they stopped their inexorable advance. The human ships intensified their resonance, their transformed hulls and evolved crews, working in perfect synchronization to project meaning into the dimensional spaces where the Devours existed. Thorn felt his consciousness expanding beyond his physical form. Touching the vast intelligence of the nearest Devourer, it was like trying to communicate with an ocean so vast, so fundamentally different, that finding common ground seemed impossible. But the Luminari had taught humanity the trick. You didn't try to make the ocean understand you. You became part of the ocean yourself. Thorn's awareness spread across his crew, linking with Park's tactical brilliance, Chun's scientific insight, Rodriguez's instinctive understanding of energy patterns. Together, they formed something greater than their individual selves, a distributed consciousness that could meet the Devours on their own terms. The communication that followed had no words. It was pure concept, pure meaning, transmitted through quantum entanglement and dimensional resonance. The Devourer acknowledged them not as prey, but as something unexpected, something that existed in the spaces between normal matter and energy, something that resonated with its own nature. Captain Vasquez's voice cut across the command channel from the Prometheus Dawn, which had moved to support the other human vessels. All ships, with me. We're going to show them something new. The human ships formed a sphere around the nearest Devourer, their resonance patterns synchronizing into a harmony that made normal space ripple, and then they changed. The transformation was visible even to species that couldn't perceive the extra dimensions humans had learned to navigate. The ships seemed to phase partially out of reality, existing in multiple states simultaneously, solid and energy, matter and wave, present and elsewhere. Devour's vast intelligence focused on them with something that might have been curiosity. Vasquez's consciousness touched Thorn's. Across the dimensional spaces their evolution had opened. Now comes the hard part, she said. We have to make them understand that we're offering partnership, not just presenting ourselves as interesting food. Together, the human crews projected a vision into the spaces where the Devours existed. They showed the pocket dimension where they had evolved, the Luminari who had taught them, and the transformation that had made them into beings that straddled the line between matter and energy. They showed the Devours what humanity could become, a species capable of existing in the forms the Devours consumed, but also capable of regenerating, of choosing to provide sustenance rather than being unwillingly consumed. They offered coexistence. Devour's response was overwhelming. Its consciousness pressed against the human minds with weight that would have crushed normal intelligence. Thorn felt his sense of self beginning to fragment under the pressure. Centuries of experience threatening to scatter like sand in a storm, but he wasn't alone. Every human in the fleet linked their consciousness together. 23 ships and 16,000 evolved souls combining into a distributed intelligence, vast enough to withstand the Devour's regard. The conversation that followed lasted subjective centuries compressed into objective minutes. The Devourer showed them its own history, fleeing something worse, consuming galaxies not out of malice but necessity, searching across countless realities for a way to survive the heat death of all existence. The humans showed the Devourer their own journey, rising from a single world to touch the stars, learning to evolve beyond their biological origins, discovering that survival sometimes meant becoming something new, and in that exchange, something unprecedented happened.